Brian, I am so excited to talk about this not because we like financial problems, because we do not want our people to struggle with the same problems. And yet a lot of these things, a lot of these issues we're going to talk about are fairly common to all Americans, at least right now in this season.
Well, look, it's pretty much every year, money is stressful to a lot of Americans. So it's not a surprise, but I think we wanted to go a little deeper. So all of our financial mutants and people who are new to our content, all those biggest ones are the ones that make the headlines. You are equipped and know how to process and even succeed no matter what you're facing.
So Gallup did a poll and they asked this question, hey, Americans, what are your top financial concerns? And they kind of rated what the responses were based on the volume of people that responded. And what's wild is when they looked at the respondents, 29% of the respondents said that inflation was their top financial concern. And the next was cost of housing at 12%, low wages at 12%, healthcare at 7%, stock market at 6%, then taxes, debt, unemployment, Social Security, retirement savings. So there are a number of financial things that Americans are worried about. And so we want to be able to speak to some of these. While we might not be able to fix them, we can tell you how should you think about them and how should you navigate them and how can you navigate your finances amidst these troubles in the best way possible.
So let's jump right in. Talk about inflation. Now, look, I think all of us as humans, we have some recency bias. When we have something that happens and it hurts, it sticks around for a lot longer. So when we see 29% as the number of concern that people have for inflation, I think that's interesting because it's down from 41% just a year earlier. So, but this is something that obviously is just in your crawl. And we want to make sure that we give you what you need to know how to process this.
And so when we look at inflation, it makes sense that this would be a concern because you all know that the way inflation works. And if you've maybe heard some headlines say, oh, inflation is down, while that may be true, while the year-over-year change in the cost of goods may be down, it doesn't mean that prices have actually come down. So coming out of the pandemic, coming out of 2020, 2021, we saw this rapid rise in prices, all the consumer goods that we buy. And while inflation now has dropped from those peak levels at like 8 to 9% increase year over year to what's a more reasonable 2.7, we're still struggling with the fact that goods are more expensive now than they were 4, 5, 6 years ago.
So let's talk about how do we actually deal with this. Here's some tips on how to deal with inflation. First of all, don't get fancy with it. You know, a lot of people think that, I got to go out there and buy some gold. I've got to go buy some real estate. I will tell you, the answer is you do want to own stuff because one of the best ways you can protect yourself is actually owning assets as things keep going up in value. But a lot of people sleep on the fact that one of the best ways to own and one of the best inflation hedges is actually just own the economy. That's like right. The S&P 500.
Another thing that you can do is if we are in a place where the cost of living the lives that we want to live gets more and more expensive, one of the things you can focus on is keeping your fixed expenses as low as possible. If right now you're thinking about maybe making that stretch to get into that bigger house or maybe making that stretch to buy the more expensive car, you may want to reconsider and rethink that decision because if inflation is increasing and if prices of goods are increasing, you want to be careful how big your footprint is, how much your guaranteed outflow is every month. And if you can keep that down and tamp that down, you might give your financial situation a chance to catch up to the expenses that are around you.
Okay, let's jump to the second big concern, a financial concern for Americans is cost of housing. And look, Bo, this is one, it hurts.
Yeah, this one is pretty painful. And I think a lot of people are feeling this. And this is something, and I'm curious if you've seen this too, Brian, across like social media. There's a lot of like vitriol and a lot of angst and anger around this because people are saying, oh yeah, it was great that you could have afforded a house, 30 years ago and da-da-da. That's just not the way that it is today. And it's a sad state for a lot of folks.
Yeah, this one's going to take a little bit of time to work itself out. If we actually look at the data, a lot of that anger and frustration, it's not false.
Not misguided.
Because one of the things I think is interesting is look at even people who make household income somewhere between $75,000 to $100,000. Back in March of 2019.
Not that long ago.
Yeah, that's a blink of an eye ago, 49% of you could afford homes. If you made $100,000, it's 65%.
49% of the housing availability was affordable to that income
so I think
range.
it's still the point can be made is that housing didn't seem that much of a stretch for you. Fast forward to where we are in March of 2025. Somebody who makes $75,000, 21%.
That's 1 in 5 homes.
Somebody who makes even $100,000, you're 6 figures. That should be a celebratory thing. Still only 30. You're not even at half, 37%. So it brings back to the point that I'm a glass half full type person, and there's always going to be something out there that is not perfect, or there's going to be a struggle. But this is going to be one that's going to take a while to kind of repair itself. Hopefully, we are going to continue to see some rising in wages or something to help offset it. I know here in the Nashville market, this has been a white hot market for a number of years now. Inventory levels are way up. Typically, when you see inventory numbers going up, that starts putting pressure on pricing. And then we've even started seeing some whispers. It's not even so much a whisper, it's more of a conversation at this point, that the Federal Reserve is feeling more and more pressure to start lowering rates. So if we can think about affordability, wages going up, inventories up, putting pressure on housing, and potentially interest rates going down, I at least like knowing that maybe tomorrow we see some better opportunities.
But if we're in this moment right now, and while there could be some reprieve coming, what are the tips right now in terms of how to approach this? Well, the first is, if we think there might be some reprieve, or if you think that your financial situation might be changing, it's okay to wait to buy a home. I think a lot of folks feel this pressure. I got to get in a home. I got to buy a house. I got to buy a house. That's the next thing. If it does not make sense for you right now, or it will put you too far out on the risk spectrum, right now may not be the time for you to go over to the home ownership side of the equation.
Yeah, and you got to protect yourself. Don't be house rich, life poor. I know this rule gets a little pressure because of what's happened with housing, but we would love for you to keep your housing costs somewhere around that 25% mark, because if you can do that, it's still going to allow you to save for your great, big, beautiful tomorrow. It allows you to actually experience some life. But I recognize that's a tough pill to swallow, and that's why you probably will have to get creative how you're doing housing. And when we say creative, we like house hacking. We like, doing anything that can help offset bringing down that cost so that you can afford more.
But we're also realists. We recognize that it's a very unique environment. A lot of folks have said, guys, I hear you. I want to stay in the 25%. That's my goal. But it's just not realistic in the area that I live, in the place that I work, with my family situation, whatever it is. So if you can't find something that fits into that frame or doesn't fit in that frame right now, you better start being realistic around, okay, if I'm going to make this decision, if I'm going to go further out on the risk spectrum than I should go, where are the other areas I can cut back? What other parts of my life can I change so that I can either protect myself from this aggressive decision or better prepare myself to be able to make a better housing decision in the future? So housing was one. Another one you've already kind of alluded to, Brian, is that it was a number of respondents to the Gallup poll said that wages were one of their financial concern. And it's not incredibly surprising. We've seen the cost of all the goods that we buy on a daily basis increase, but it does not seem that the level of wage increase has necessarily kept up with that rise.
Yeah, this is one that you see right after the pandemic. We did see wages spike up to close to 7% wage growth. Now we're a little above average, but we're right around 4.1%. So if you're looking at the actual wage data, it's showing that this is not in any hurry to fix all the housing issues and affordability issues. So we got to kind of take it on upon our own shoulders and figure out, how do we get to push our wages up that kind of separates us from the general population. So we want to give you some tips on how you can approach increasing your wages.
Now, this is one, I think there's so much literature and so many people out there telling you how to do this. And frankly, I think they're telling you how to do it the wrong way. They essentially say, hey, march into your boss's office and say, boss, I demand more wages. And I just don't know that that's the best way to communicate the value that you provide to an organization. But if you are someone who works for a company and has superiors, if you can find a win-win, find a way that, what can I do that would be so valuable for the entity for which I work, that would also allow me to generate more value for myself. And if you can create that win-win, you create a scenario that makes it very, very easy for everyone to be excited about. So I am not a fan in the business world of like financial ultimatums. Hey, I need you to show up here or else. I just don't think those often end in the place you want to be, especially for folks earlier on in their career who perhaps don't have the same leverage as more seasoned workers.
Well, I mean, think about it. You spend just as much time with your work family as you do with your personal family. So you always have to navigate work experience in tactful ways. And that's why I love the win-win philosophy, is because it's more persuasion versus ultimatums, like you said, and that's because even if you win, did you win in the long term if you create a sour situation for the future? So try to find that win-win. I know it's very easy to say out loud, but I do think a lot of people, it is very helpful if you can try to figure out how you help your employer, but also create a win for your personal family. And then the second thing is, we put on here, don't be afraid to look for a new job, but this is definitely a measure twice, cut once. Because I think sometimes now look, I have a bias. I'm a decent sized employer. So I'm always nervous when you say, hey, go find a new job. I don't want my people leaving either. So it's one of those things, just be honest with yourself, put on your 3D glasses, because sometimes the grass is not greener. I'd rather you find the win-win before you grab the ultimate, eject seat and find that new job.
Well, I think a lot of folks, they arrive at the conclusion the grass is greener, without thinking really on the long term. What you ought to do is, just like you do all of your other major financial decisions, if you are considering changing jobs, do a 3D plan. Go ahead and figure, okay, if I go, what's the dream, what's the down to earth, and what's the doo-doo? And if I stay, what's the dream, what's the down to earth, what's the doo-doo? And then you assign probabilities to each of those. Because what you want to make sure is, yes, if you're in a job where there's no career trajectory, there's no upside potential, you don't have a way to influence where you're going, and you're unhappy, that may make sense to look for a new job. But if those things do exist, it might just be a matter of patience, waiting and doing what's necessary in order to change your future financial circumstance. But only you're going to be able to assess that. But like you said, Brian, you want to measure 2, 3, 4 times before you make that huge life jump.
You don't want to make a long-term mistake for a short-term problem.
That's right.
That's the biggest thing we're trying to protect you from. So that's why I like doing the 3D glass plan on both your current job versus the other job. We'll let you handicap what's the career opportunity in the long term, so you can compare and contrast and make the right decision.
And then also consider furthering your education. And that may not mean like going back to college or going to get some degree, but is there something you can do in your current vocation that increases your skill set? Maybe it's learning some new skill that was not previously there that makes you more valuable either to your current employer or to future employers. And right now, it's easier than ever to be able to do that. You don't have to go get a piece of paper, spend a lot of money, take on student loan debt. You can actually do that on your own. So don't forget that you also have the ability to make yourself more valuable by how you train yourself and how you equip yourself with skills.
And that leads to the last stress point or problem that Americans are facing. And that's just concern about the stock market or even investing in general. And this is one we might know a little thing about, is that I get it. Money can be very emotional, and people, what feels good in the short term or safe in the short term can actually be risky in the long term. And what's great for you in the long term, in the short term, can sometimes feel really scary and risky. So how do we bring this all together? And I think, Bo, if we just look at the last 2 years, this is a perfect example on how irrational or emotional things can feel, but still make the point. If that you just stay consistent and always be buying, you'll be okay.
Yeah, it's wild. If we think about from January of 2024 to June of 2025 to right now, the S&P 500 is like 30% over that time period. But it has not been a straight shot from 1% to 5% to 10 to 50. There were some fits and starts. And if you remember back in April of this year, the market lost 18%. Like we were right there on the cusp of bear market territory. And it was kind of frightening. But as we sit here and look at it right now, this has been a great year for most investors in 2025, even though there was that intra-year decline. But I think a lot of new investors, a lot of people coming out of the workforce, maybe people that aren't as well versed in how the markets work, they saw that April downturn and they got spooked and they got scared. They said, oh man, this feels very, very uncertain. But I don't think it's quite as uncertain as they think.
I mean, this is something that everybody needs to understand. Historically, markets recover in what's called a V-shaped recovery. And that's what you look at these illustrations. Right, you can see the V's and the fact that that's why it's hard to time it, because you have to not get it right once. You have to get it right twice, is because even if you miss the downturn, a lot of times you miss the recovery and you didn't really do yourself any good. So be careful. We want to give you some tips. Here's the part we want everybody to know. Investing doesn't have to be a gamble. If you create a good investment plan, it will serve you well before, during, and even after the next market volatility moment that you'll have. It's just that's why you have to create a plan, triage your personal finance situation, and let your investment plan actually reflect who you are and what your goals are. And it's not a gamble then. It's more of, this is what I have to do to create success.
And when it comes to investing, it's not a short-term endeavor. We just showed you the S&P 500 over the last 2 years, not even 2 years, over the last 18 months, 2024 and so far this year. That's a short timeline. Even if we would have gone 2, 3, 4 years, that's a short timeline. When you put money to work, when you invest in risk assets, we want you to have a timeline of at least 5 years or greater. And if you can think about the money in those terms, it doesn't matter what the market's doing this day, this month, this quarter, or even this year if you have a long timeline. So recognize that when you're putting your money to work, it's a long-term endeavor and you need to treat it as such.
And that leads to the last thing. We say this a lot because I think it's worth an echo just so you get the perspective just kind of pushed deeper into who you are and what you do with your money is when in doubt, zoom out. Guys, people, we just told you there's lots of fits and starts with things and there's lots of volatility. It's scary. Every year the markets probably go up or down and have intra-year changes of close to 14, 15%. But if you just can understand and know what you expect out of your assets and know historically, look, markets make, especially if you're looking at the S&P 500, somewhere between 9 to 11%
That's right.
on average. It will give you the perspective to understand when in doubt, zoom out, always be buying, and your future self will give you those happy, sloppy tears because you've done the hard work and building your great, big, beautiful tomorrow.
Happy, sloppy tears. You heard it here first.
It's true.
Sloppy tears.
Anybody, when we do our millionaire surveys, if you think about how often our audience and our clients will tell you, these guys are right. If all the things that I was scared about, if I just stayed consistent, I made it automatic for the people, but through automation and just taking a little bit today for that great, big, beautiful tomorrow, you'll wake up one day and be like, holy cow, this worked. This slow process has created a tremendous opportunity and wealth for myself